In the heart of the Persian Empire, a young orphan girl rose from obscurity to wear the crown of a queen, but hidden within her beauty was a secret that could cost her life. When a deadly decree threatened to wipe out her people, she faced a choice that would test her courage against the power of kings and the pride of her greatest enemy. One wrong move could mean her death, but one act of bravery could change the destiny of a nation. This is the story of a hidden queen, a deadly plot, and a breathtaking turnaround that only God could orchestrate. Stay with us to the end and don't forget to subscribe for more timeless stories brought to life. The story begins in the heart of the Persian Empire, where King Ahasuerus ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Ethiopia. His throne was the most powerful in the world. When he spoke, nations trembled. When he commanded, no one could resist. One day, during a grand feast, the king called for his queen, Vashti. He wanted her to appear before the nobles and governors to show her beauty to the kingdom. But Queen Vashti refused. The king's joy turned to rage. In that moment, Vashti lost her crown. The throne beside him stood empty. A search began for a new queen. From every corner of the empire, young women were brought to the palace. Among them was a young Jewish woman named Esther. She was different. Her parents had died when she was a child, and her cousin Mordecai had raised her as his own daughter. She was not just beautiful in appearance, her spirit was gentle, her heart was kind. Yet in this new world of palaces and power, she carried a secret. No one knew she was a Jew. Mordecai had warned her not to tell. When Esther stood before the king, he was struck by her presence. Out of all the young women, he chose her and placed the royal crown upon her head. Esther became Queen of Persia. But though she now lived in the palace, her true identity remained hidden. The girl who once walked the streets as an orphan now walked the halls of power, carrying a secret that could one day decide the fate of her people. Not long after Esther became queen, a shadow entered the palace. A man named Haman rose to power, second only to the king. The king ordered all officials and servants to bow before him. And everyone did except Mordecai. Day after day, Mordecai refused. His reason was simple: he would not bow to any man. He would bow only to the Lord. Haman's pride turned to fury. It was not enough for him to punish Mordecai alone. His hatred spread to Mordecai's people, the Jews. Haman went before the king with a dark request. He said, "There is a certain people scattered throughout your kingdom. They do not obey your laws. It is not in your best interest to let them live. Issue a decree and let them be destroyed." The king trusted Haman and handed him his signet ring, giving him the power to seal the order. Messengers were sent throughout the empire. On the 13th day of the 12th month, every Jew in the kingdom, young and old, men and women, was marked for destruction. The decree spread like fire through the provinces. The sound of weeping filled the air. Despair settled on the people of God. In the palace courtyard, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. Esther's servants told her what they saw, and she sent word to him, asking why he mourned. Mordecai's reply shook her. He told her of the decree and sent a copy of the order. Then he gave her a message that would change her life forever. Go to the king. Beg him for mercy. Plead for your people. Who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Fear filled Esther's heart. She knew the law. Anyone who approached the king without being called would be put to death, unless the king held out his golden scepter. It did not matter that she was queen. If she entered uninvited, she risked her life. Esther sent back her answer. Gather all the Jews in the city. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. I and my servants will fast as well. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. The days of fasting passed in silence. Hungry stomachs groaned. Prayers rose like whispers in the night. In every home, the Jews cried out to God. Their only hope rested in Esther's courage. When the third day came, Esther rose. She dressed in her royal robes. Every thread seemed heavy with fear and purpose. Slowly, step by step, she walked through the palace. Guards watched as she approached the great hall where the king sat on his throne. The room was filled with officials and servants, but all eyes turned to her. She had not been called. With every step, her life hung by a thread. Esther stood before the king. The silence was thick. If he turned away, she would die. If he frowned, she would be taken away. Seconds felt like eternity. Then, the king's eyes lifted. He saw Esther standing in the doorway. And slowly, he stretched out his golden scepter toward her. Life flooded back into Esther's body. She stepped forward and touched the tip of the scepter. She had been spared. The king spoke. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it shall be given to you." Esther's heart raced. This was her moment. Yet she did not cry out at once. Instead, with calm wisdom, she said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared." The king agreed, and Haman was summoned. The three of them sat at Esther's banquet. The king asked again, "What is your request?" "It shall be granted." Esther replied, "If the king is pleased, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to another banquet that I will prepare. Then I will answer the king's question." Haman left the palace that night proud and boasting. Twice he had been invited by the queen herself. Yet his pride collapsed the moment he saw Mordecai sitting at the gate, refusing to bow. Haman's rage boiled over. His wife and friends gave him a plan: build a gallows, 50 cubits high, and ask the king to hang Mordecai on it. Haman's face lit up with cruel joy. That very night he ordered the gallows to be built. But as Haman plotted in the dark, the king could not sleep. That night, the palace was silent, but the king could not sleep. He tossed and turned upon his bed, restless and uneasy. At last, he called for the royal records to be read aloud to him. As the servants unrolled the scrolls and recited the past events of the kingdom, one story stood out. It told of a time when two men had plotted to assassinate the king, and how a man named Mordecai had uncovered the plot and saved his life. The king frowned. "What honor has been given to Mordecai for this?" The servants searched the records. "Nothing has been done for him, my lord." The king's mind began to stir. Morning came, and he called for someone from his court to advise him. By providence, Haman had just entered the outer court, eager to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had built. He was brought before the king. The king asked, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman's heart leapt. He thought to himself, "Who could the king possibly want to honor more than me?" His pride whispered in his ear, and he answered, "For the man the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, one that the king himself has worn. Let a horse be brought, one that the king himself has ridden, with a royal crown placed upon its head. Let one of the king's most noble princes lead this man through the city streets, proclaiming, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" The king nodded. "Excellent. Do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect a single detail." The blood drained from Haman's face. His heart pounded in disbelief. The man he hated most, the man he came to destroy, was the very man the king chose to honor. But he had no choice. That same day, Haman dressed Mordecai in royal robes, placed him on the king's horse, and walked before him through the streets, proclaiming words that burned like fire in his throat. "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." When it was over, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home in shame. His head was covered, his pride was shattered. His wife and friends warned him, "If Mordecai is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him. You will surely fall." Before he could even process their words, servants arrived to bring him quickly to the banquet Queen Esther had prepared. That evening, the king and Haman sat once more with Queen Esther. The king turned to her and said, "What is your request, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you, even up to half the kingdom." This was the moment Esther had been waiting for. Her heart beat fast, but her voice was steady. She said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition. And spare my people, this is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have remained silent. But this is too great a threat to ignore." The king's face darkened. "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther turned, her eyes fixed like fire. She said, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." The king rose in anger, pacing into the garden. Haman's heart sank into terror. He stayed behind to plead with Esther for his life. In desperation, he fell upon the couch where Esther was reclining, just as the king returned. The sight enraged the king further. "Will he even assault the queen while I am in the house?" he thundered. At those words, the servants covered Haman's face. One of them spoke up, "Behold, the gallows Haman built for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, stands at his house 50 cubits high." The king commanded, "Hang him on it." And so Haman was taken and hanged upon the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The anger of the king was satisfied, and the curse of Haman was broken. But the danger was not yet over. The decree Haman had sealed with the king's ring could not be undone. The day still approached when the Jews were marked for destruction. Esther wept before the king, falling at his feet. Through tears she begged him to save her people from the law that Haman had written. The king lifted his golden scepter to her once again, granting her request. He said to Esther and Mordecai, "Write another decree as you see fit, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked." So Mordecai and Esther called for the royal scribes. A new decree was written and sent out to all the provinces. It declared that on the appointed day, the Jews had the right to gather together and defend themselves against anyone who would attack them. Couriers rode out on swift horses, carrying the king's command throughout the empire. Mordecai left the palace that day clothed not in sackcloth, but in royal robes of blue and white, with a crown of gold upon his head. The city of Susa, which had once been filled with mourning, erupted in joy. For the Jews, it was a time of light, gladness, joy, and honor. The day of destruction finally came, the day when the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them. But the tables were turned. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. In every province and city, they gathered to defend their lives. None could stand against them, for fear of them fell on all people. The officials of the provinces, the governors, and the royal administrators helped them, because the fame of Mordecai had spread throughout the land. The Jews struck down their enemies, but they did not lay hands on the plunder. In the citadel of Susa alone, 500 were killed. The 10 sons of Haman were also executed, ending the line of the enemy who had sought their destruction. That day, Mordecai's name rose even higher in honor, and the Jews celebrated their deliverance with gladness. Throughout the provinces, wherever Jews lived, there was feasting, rejoicing, and celebration. Out of fear, many people of other nations even chose to become Jews themselves, joining in their victory. What had begun as a decree of death turned into a story of survival and triumph. From that time forward, the Jews declared an annual feast called Purim, named after the lots that Haman had cast to decide the day of their destruction. Each year, they would remember how God turned their mourning into joy and their sorrow into celebration. They would remember how a hidden queen risked her life, how a faithful cousin stood firm, and how the God of Israel wrote a great reversal into the history of his people. Esther's courage saved a nation. Her story became a testimony to every generation that even in the darkest moments, when death seems certain and hope seems lost, God is still at work behind the scenes. A banquet turned into a trap, a gallows became a grave for its builder, a decree of destruction became a festival of deliverance. And so the story of Esther ends not with despair, but with victory. A young woman who once entered the palace in silence left behind a legacy that echoed through the centuries. She had been placed in the kingdom for such a time as this.